Imagine waking up tomorrow and your bank account still shows $12,000. Your paycheck hits right on time, your debit card still works when you tap it, but nobody wants your money. The gas station clerk shakes his head. The grocery store has a sign taped to the register that says cash only, and even then they've doubled the prices since yesterday. Your landlord laughs when you try to hand him this month's rent because by the time you finish counting it, it's worth less than when you started. It sounds like science fiction, like something that could never happen in a modern economy, but it's already happened, not once, not twice, dozens of times in dozens of countries to millions of people who woke up one morning convinced their money was safe. So today we're answering one question. What actually happens when money stops working? And more importantly, how do you make sure that when it does, you're not the person holding the bag? Let's start with something you've never actually thought about, even though you use it every single day. What is money, really? Before money existed, humans traded directly. You had chickens, I had wheat. And if I needed eggs and you needed bread, we made a deal. But this system had a problem so obvious it eventually broke civilization's ability to scale. Economists call it the coincidence of wants. I need what you have, but you don't need what I have. Now what? You just don't trade. The economy grinds to a halt. So humans needed something else, something everyone would accept, regardless of what they personally needed that day. And thousands of years ago, across completely different civilizations that had never even met each other, humans landed on the same answer independently. Gold. Not because a king declared it valuable, not because a government printed it. Gold became money because it had properties nothing else had. It doesn't rot. It doesn't rust. You can melt it down and divide it into smaller pieces without destroying its value. It's the same gold in Egypt as it is in China, as it is in Rome. But here's the part almost nobody thinks about. Gold isn't valuable because you can eat it or build a house with it. Gold is valuable because everyone agrees it's valuable. That's it. That's the entire secret. And once you understand that, you've just unlocked the biggest secret about money itself. Money was never really about the material. It was always about trust. Fast forward a few thousand years, and carrying around bags of gold everywhere becomes a problem. So banks started issuing paper receipts. You'd deposit your gold, and they'd hand you a piece of paper that said, "This paper is worth this much gold, redeemable anytime." People started trading the paper instead of the gold because it was lighter, easier, and just as trustworthy. That paper receipt is the great-great-grandfather of the dollar bill in your wallet right now. Except somewhere along the way, something changed. Governments realized they didn't actually need to back their paper money with gold anymore. In 1971, the United States fully severed the dollar from gold, and that moment created the financial system every single person watching this video has lived their entire life inside of. It's called fiat currency, and the word fiat literally means by decree. In other words, the dollar in your pocket has value today for one reason and one reason only, because the government says it does, and because everyone around you agrees to act like it does. Read that again, because it's about to change how you see every single purchase you make. That $100 bill isn't valuable because of the paper. It's not valuable because of the ink. It's valuable because of an invisible agreement between millions of strangers who have never met, all silently agreeing to accept it in exchange for real things: food, shelter, time, labor. And that agreement is a lot more fragile than you've ever been told. Think about what actually happens every time you buy a coffee at Starbucks. You hand over a $5 bill, and the barista hands you a cup of coffee without a second of hesitation. Nobody checks if that $5 bill is backed by gold sitting in a vault somewhere. Nobody calls the Federal Reserve to confirm your money is legitimate. The entire transaction happens on pure, unspoken trust. Walmart accepts it, Amazon accepts it, The Apple Store accepts it for a $1,500 phone. Your landlord accepts it for a rent that represents a roof over your family's head. Your mortgage lender accepts it for a loan that took you 30 years to pay off. Every single one of those transactions is built on the same invisible foundation: confidence. And here's the terrifying part. That confidence isn't guaranteed. It's not a law of physics. It's a belief. And beliefs can break. So what actually happens when that belief starts to crack? It usually starts quietly. A government spends more than it collects in taxes, year after year. And instead of raising taxes or cutting spending, it does something that feels painless in the moment. It prints more money to cover the gap. At first, this seems harmless. More dollars floating around the economy. What's the problem? Here's the problem, and this is one of the most important concepts in all of finance, so pay close attention. Money itself has no real value. What has value are the actual things money can buy: food, houses, cars, labor, land. Money is just a claim on those things, like a ticket. Now imagine a concert with exactly 1,000 seats, and exactly 1,000 tickets were printed. Each ticket guarantees you a seat. But what happens if the organizer suddenly prints another 9,000 tickets without adding a single new seat? Suddenly 10,000 people are holding tickets for a venue that only fits 1,000. The tickets haven't changed, but their value has collapsed because now there are 10 times more claims chasing the same number of seats. That's inflation. That's the entire mechanism in one image. When a government prints more money without the economy producing more actual goods and services to match it, every single dollar that already exists becomes a smaller and smaller slice of the same pie. This is why prices creep up every year, even when nothing about the actual product changed. It's not that a candy bar became more valuable. It's that your dollar became less valuable. Now, here's where things get genuinely frightening, because most inflation is slow, a few percent a year. Annoying, but survivable. But what happens when a government doesn't just print a little extra money, but loses all control and starts printing enormous amounts, again and again, because it's the only way to pay its bills? That's when you get hyperinflation. And history has shown us exactly what that looks like in horrifying detail. In Germany, in 1923, the government was drowning in debt after World War I, and it did what desperate governments do. It printed money to cover the gap. At first slowly, then faster, then completely out of control. Within months, prices were doubling every few days. People were paid wages twice a day because by the afternoon, morning wages had already lost significant value. Workers were pushing wheelbarrows full of cash just to buy a loaf of bread. Some people burned stacks of currency for heat because it was literally cheaper than buying firewood. Fast forward to Zimbabwe in the 2000s, the government printed so much money that at the peak, prices were doubling roughly every 24 hours. They eventually printed a $100 trillion bill, not a typo, a $100 trillion on a single note, and it still wasn't enough to buy a loaf of bread by the time hyperinflation peaked. And this isn't ancient history. This has happened in your lifetime. Venezuela, sitting on some of the largest oil reserves on the planet, watched its currency become so worthless that people weighed cash instead of counting it, because counting it took too long. Argentina has gone through wave after wave of currency crises, so often that many Argentinians simply don't trust their own currency and convert their savings into other currencies the moment they get paid. In every single one of these cases, the pattern is identical. A government prints too much money, prices explode, people lose trust in their currency. And once trust breaks, it breaks fast, because money's entire value depends on people believing in it. The moment enough people stop believing, the whole system can collapse in weeks, not years. So here's the uncomfortable question you should be asking right now. Could this happen anywhere? Could this happen here? To answer that, you need to understand the machine that controls the money supply in the first place. Every country has a central bank. In the United States, it's the Federal Reserve. Its job is to manage the money supply and interest rates, essentially controlling how many tickets exist for the concert we talked about earlier. When the economy slows down, the Federal Reserve can lower interest rates, making it cheaper to borrow money. This encourages spending, which can boost the economy. But it also means more money enters circulation. And in times of crisis, central banks sometimes create money directly, a process often nicknamed printing money, even though today it mostly happens digitally with a few keystrokes rather than an actual printing press. Meanwhile, governments borrow money by selling bonds, essentially promising to pay lenders back later with interest. The United States national debt has climbed into the tens of trillions of dollars. And every year, a portion of tax revenue doesn't go to roads or schools or hospitals. It goes straight to paying interest on debt that's already been spent. This creates a dangerous incentive. It becomes tempting for a government to quietly let some inflation happen, because inflation effectively shrinks the value of existing debt over time. It's like paying someone back with dollars that are worth less than the dollars you originally borrowed. Convenient for the borrower, devastating for anyone holding cash on the sidelines. This is why savvy investors have a saying: inflation is the silent tax that never needs a vote. Now, let's connect this to something that probably matters to you a lot more than economic theory: your paycheck. Here's why wealthy people generally don't panic about inflation the way everyday people do, and it has nothing to do with luck. Cash sitting in a savings account is a melting ice cube. Even at a modest inflation rate, money that just sits there loses purchasing power every single year, quietly, invisibly, without you ever seeing a single dollar disappear from your account balance. Your number goes up from interest, sure, but what that number can actually buy shrinks. Wealthy individuals rarely hoard cash. Instead, they own things, real businesses that produce goods and services people need, regardless of inflation. Real estate, because land and buildings tend to rise in value alongside inflation, and rent can be adjusted to keep pace. Stocks, which represent ownership in companies that can raise their prices when costs rise, protecting their profits and therefore their value. Index funds, which spread that ownership across hundreds of companies at once, reducing risk. And sometimes gold, the same asset humans trusted thousands of years ago, still used today as a hedge because it can't be printed into oblivion by any government. None of this is a guarantee, and none of this is investment advice telling you exactly what to buy. It's simply the underlying principle wealthy people understand instinctively. When your money is tied up in things that produce value, or that people will always need, inflation becomes far less terrifying because your wealth moves with the economy instead of sitting still while the economy moves past it. This brings us to what might be the single biggest illusion in personal finance, something that fools nearly everyone at some point in their life. You get a raise at work. Your salary jumps from $50,000 to $55,000 a year. It feels like progress. It feels like you're winning. But ask yourself this: what did rent cost 5 years ago in your city compared to now? What did groceries cost? Healthcare? A college education? In most parts of the United States, these costs have climbed dramatically over the past several years, in some cases faster than wages have grown. This means it's entirely possible to earn more dollars every single year and still be able to afford less than you could before. Your bank account shows a bigger number. Your actual quality of life quietly shrinks. This is the difference between nominal wealth, the number on the screen, and real wealth, what that number can actually buy you in the real world. This is why so many people feel like they're working harder than ever, earning more than ever, and somehow still falling behind. It's not necessarily because they're managing money poorly. It's because the value of the money itself has been quietly eroding underneath them the entire time. So let's bring everything together, because by now you understand something most people go their entire lives never fully grasping. Money was never wealth. Money was always just a symbol, a claim, a ticket that represents access to real things in the real world. Gold worked as money because people trusted it. Paper worked because it represented gold. And today's dollar works purely because millions of strangers continue to silently agree, transaction after transaction, that it still means something. When governments print too much of it, that ticket becomes worth less. When trust collapses entirely, as it did in Germany, in Zimbabwe, in Venezuela, that ticket can become worth almost nothing at all, sometimes within months. This is why the goal was never to simply accumulate more dollars. The goal is to own things that hold real value, things that produce, things that people need, things that survive even when the currency measuring them changes completely. Because here's the truth very few people ever stop to consider. Money isn't wealth. Money is simply a claim on wealth. And the day enough people stop believing in that claim, money stops working, no matter how many zeros are printed on the bill. Subscribe for more.